One choice. One moment. One love story. Welcome to When He Chose Her. Enjoy the story. Funny how the people who laugh the loudest at your life are usually the ones who know the least about it. The October wind swept across the rooftop bar in downtown Chicago, carrying the sound of clinking glasses, distant sirens, and the forced laughter of people trying too hard to prove they were successful. Elena Whitmore stood near the edge of the rooftop with one hand wrapped around a sparkling water she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. Below her, the city glowed gold against the dark river, every skyscraper window flickering like tiny stars. 20 years ago, these people had shared lockers and cafeteria tables. Tonight, they shared stock portfolios, Botox recommendations, and carefully rehearsed happiness. Elena, a voice called out behind her. Smooth. Familiar. Dangerous in the way old memories always were. She turned slowly. Trevor Kane approached with the same confident grin he'd worn in high school when he thought the world belonged to him. Expensive navy blazer. White sneakers too clean for Chicago weather. A Rolex he kept making sure everyone noticed whenever he lifted his drink. Beside him stood a blonde woman with glossy lips and the exhausted expression of someone who spent too much time taking photos of food. Trevor stopped in front of Elena and blinked dramatically. Wow, he laughed. It's really you. Elena smiled politely. Hi, Trevor. You disappeared. He looked her up and down. Still in Chicago? Mostly. Doing what now? Before she could answer, someone from behind the bar shouted. Trevor, tell everyone about the app deal. Trevor lifted one finger without looking away from Elena. In a second, then he leaned slightly closer. So, Elena took a slow sip of water. I work at a restaurant downtown. Trevor burst into laughter, loud enough that nearby conversations paused. No way. He shook his head. You're still waitressing? A few people nearby exchanged awkward smiles. Someone whispered Elena's name, suddenly remembering her. Trevor's girlfriend tilted her head sympathetically, which somehow felt worse. Well, Trevor continued, at least. You always were good with people. Elena smiled softly. Calm. Controlled. The tips are decent. A couple people laughed under their breath. Trevor took another sip of bourbon and glanced deliberately at her left hand. Wait. He smirked. No ring. The rooftop suddenly felt quieter. No ring yet, he asked louder this time. Damn. Life really hit you hard after 30, huh? The influencer girlfriend covered her mouth, pretending to hide a laugh. Elena looked down briefly at the thin silver bracelet resting against her wrist. Her wedding ring sat hidden beneath the sleeve of her coat. Not because she was ashamed, because privacy had become survival. Trevor mistook her silence for embarrassment and smiled wider. Hey, don't worry, he said, patting her shoulder with fake kindness. Success isn't for everyone. Her fingers tightened slightly around the glass. Just slightly. Then she smiled again. I'm actually happy, Trevor. He laughed immediately. That's exactly what unhappy people say. More laughter. Sharp. Hollow. Elena looked out over the skyline instead of reacting. The wind lifted strands of dark blonde hair across her face. Calm eyes. Quiet posture. A woman untouched by the performance around her. Trevor noticed it too, and somehow it irritated him more than if she'd argued back. You know what your problem always was? He said. You never aimed higher. Maybe, Elena replied softly. Or maybe I just stopped confusing loud people with successful ones. A low damn escaped from someone near the bar. Trevor's smile twitched for half a second before recovering. Still sarcastic, he muttered. At least some things survived. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and grinned proudly. Speaking of success, he raised his voice for the group around him. My startup just closed a $7 million expansion round this morning. Cheers erupted immediately. Trevor lifted both hands modestly, pretending he hated the attention. Thank you, thank you. It's been a crazy year. Elena nodded politely. Congratulations. Thanks. He looked at her again. You know, ladies, he turned toward the small crowd gathering nearby. Never date potential. Date. Success. A few men laughed harder than necessary. One woman visibly cringed. Elena stared at him for a long moment. Not angry. Not hurt. Just tired in the way people become when they realize some adults never emotionally leave high school. Then her phone vibrated quietly inside her purse. The screen lit up with one name. Damien. Elena's expression changed instantly. Softer. Warmer. Almost impossible to notice unless someone truly knew her. Trevor noticed anyway. What? He smirked. Your manager asking you to cover another shift? Elena glanced at him once, then answered the call and stepped toward the far balcony overlooking the river. The cold wind wrapped around her coat as she pressed the phone gently to her ear. Hey, she whispered. A deep voice answered immediately. Calm. Familiar. Happy anniversary, Mrs. Holloway. Elena closed her eyes for half a second, smiling despite herself. Down below the building, black SUVs had already begun pulling quietly to the curb beneath the glowing Chicago skyline. The first time Damien Holloway walked into Bellamy Jazz House, nobody recognized him. No security team. No designer suit. No headlines following behind him like shadows. Just a tall man in a charcoal sweater sitting alone near the piano with exhaustion hidden carefully behind his eyes. Rain tapped softly against the restaurant windows that night. Chicago in November. Cold enough to make strangers walk faster and lonely people stay out longer than they should. Elena noticed him immediately, not because he looked rich, but because he looked sad in an expensive way. There was something oddly quiet about him. Most wealthy men entered restaurants expecting attention. Damien entered like he hoped nobody would speak to him at all. Table for one? Elena asked, balancing 3 menus against one arm. He glanced up slowly. Gray eyes. Tired eyes. Please. She led him toward the back corner beside the piano. The old jazz player near the stage nodded at Elena as she passed. Your mysterious customer is back, he whispered. Elena smiled faintly. Maybe he just likes your music. Nobody likes my music this much. Damien sat down carefully, loosening the cuffs of his sweater like someone finally escaping a very long day. Elena handed him a menu. Kitchen closes in 40 minutes, but Clara still makes the best bourbon pecan pie in Illinois. A tiny smile appeared on his face for the first time. That sounded dangerously specific. I believe in honesty during dessert recommendations. Then I will trust you completely. It became their pattern after that. Every Thursday. Same corner table. Same black coffee. Same silence that somehow never felt uncomfortable. Elena never asked what he did for work. Damien never volunteered. Some nights he stayed for 1 hour. Some nights until closing. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he simply sat there listening to jazz while Chicago's snow drifted quietly outside the windows. And Elena, unlike everyone else in his life, let him exist without demanding anything from him. One night, close to midnight, she found him staring at the untouched coffee in front of him. Long day? She asked softly. Damien let out a dry laugh. Long year. She leaned lightly against the booth across from him. You know what my grandmother used to say? What? People who carry the most usually become experts at pretending they are fine. Damien looked at her then. Really looked at her. Like he had spent months surrounded by noise and suddenly heard something honest. Was your grandmother a therapist? He asked quietly. Elena smiled. No. Irish waitress. Same thing. He laughed unexpectedly. A real laugh this time. Warm. Brief. Human. After that night, things changed slowly. Small things first. He learned she hated olives. She learned he secretly loved terrible 80s music. He learned she worked double shifts because she was helping pay medical bills for her aunt. She learned he had not slept properly in almost 2 years. Sometimes he arrived looking perfectly composed, but Elena noticed the details others missed. The shaking hands hidden beneath expensive watches. The distant stare during crowded nights. The way he occasionally froze when too many people recognized him at once. One snowy evening, she quietly placed a slice of pie in front of him without charging for it. What is this? He asked. Emergency pie. Is that a medical term? No. But you look like your soul needed sugar. He stared at her for a second before lowering his eyes toward the pie. Most people just ask for photos. Well, Elena shrugged. You looked like you needed kindness more than attention. He never forgot that sentence. Weeks later, the truth finally arrived by accident. Elena had been carrying 2 coffee mugs toward Damien's table when a television above the bar suddenly flashed breaking news. Billionaire investor Damien Holloway acquires Meridian Tech in record $12 billion deal. The entire restaurant went silent. A customer near the bar pointed directly at Damien. Holy hell, someone whispered. That is him. Elena looked from the television to the man sitting quietly beside the piano. Damien closed his eyes briefly like a prisoner, hearing his sentence repeated out loud. Well, Elena said after a long pause, that explains the watch. Damien looked up carefully, almost bracing for her reaction. "You are not surprised?" "I am a little surprised." She set the coffee down in front of him. "But honestly, you still look more tired than rich." For the first time in months, Damien smiled without forcing it. Deep down, something inside him shifted that night. Because Elena Whitmore had just done something no one else seemed capable of anymore. She saw the billionaire, and then looked past him. The problem with falling in love with someone private was that the world usually found out all at once. Elena learned that 3 months after the television incident at Bellamy Jazz House. Until then, Damien had continued showing up every Thursday like nothing had changed. Same corner booth, same black coffee, same exhausted smile that softened only around her. But now people stared when he walked in. Phones lifted. Whispers followed him through the restaurant like smoke. One customer nearly dropped a martini glass after realizing who was sitting beside the piano. Damien noticed every reaction immediately. Elena noticed him noticing. "You can stop coming here if it is stressful," she told him one evening while refilling his coffee. Outside, sleet rattled softly against the windows. The jazz pianist played something slow and lonely in the background. Damien looked up from his cup. "Do you want me to stop?" "No." Her answer came too fast. That surprised both of them. A small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Then I think I will survive." She rolled her eyes lightly. "You are annoyingly calm for a billionaire." "That is because internally I am screaming." "Good. Healthy people usually are." He laughed quietly under his breath. God, she loved that sound. The strange thing about Damien Holloway was that he never treated Elena like a project to rescue. He did not try to buy her apartment building. He did not offer her expensive vacations to impress her. He simply stayed, night after night, listening, asking questions nobody else bothered asking. What music she liked, which book made her cry the hardest, why she always looked at the lake whenever life overwhelmed her. One night after closing, Elena found him stacking chairs beside the empty tables. "What are you doing?" she asked. Damien shrugged. "You look tired. You own 3 companies. For now. And you are helping a waitress stack chairs at midnight?" He placed another chair upside down carefully. "I contain multitudes." She laughed despite herself. That was unbelievably dramatic. "I am rich. We are raised dramatically." Bellamy Jazz House slowly became their place. The old pianist started calling Damien Wall Street Sinatra. Clara from the kitchen pretended not to notice when Elena sat with him after closing. Even customers sensed something changing between them. Not flashy, not rushed, just quiet, deep, real. One snowy Friday, Elena arrived late after helping her aunt through a difficult medical appointment. Her shoulders ached. Her head pounded. The city felt heavy. When she entered Bellamy, Clara immediately pointed toward the back booth. "Your sad billionaire has been waiting 45 minutes, she whispered. Elena frowned. "He is not my billionaire." Clara smirked. "Baby, that man looks at you like you invented breathing." Elena tried not to smile as she walked toward the booth. Damien sat there in a dark wool coat, staring absently at the falling snow outside. But the second he saw her, his entire expression softened. Every single time. It terrified her a little. "You are late," he said quietly. "Traffic? Chicago or emotional?" "Both." He slid a warm cup of tea toward her before she even sat down. "Chamomile. Honey already stirred in." Elena stared at the cup for a second. "How did you know I had a bad day?" Damien looked genuinely confused. "Your left eye twitches when you are overwhelmed." Silence. Small, dangerous silence. Elena suddenly realized this man noticed everything about her. The way she tucked hair behind one ear when nervous. The way she reread text messages twice before replying. The exact moment her smile stopped being real during difficult nights. Nobody had ever paid attention that carefully before. "That is slightly creepy," she whispered. Damien nodded seriously. "I practiced in the mirror." She laughed so hard she nearly spilled the tea. And for one brief moment, the exhaustion disappeared from both of them. Weeks later, Damien invited her to dinner somewhere expensive enough that the menus did not list prices. Elena almost refused immediately. "I do not belong in places like that," she admitted while tying her apron before work. Damien looked at her carefully. "Elena, what? You belong anywhere you decide to stand." Her breath caught slightly. Damn him for speaking so gently. The dinner itself became a disaster almost immediately. A famous socialite recognized Damien halfway through appetizers and loudly walked over to their table. "Damien Holloway, she said dramatically. You disappeared from Aspen. Then she noticed Elena. The pause that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Oh, the woman said slowly. You brought company. Elena recognized the tone instantly. Rich woman pity. The kind disguised as politeness. Damien recognized it too. His entire expression cooled by several degrees. Her name is Elena, he said calmly. And she is the best part of my evening. The woman blinked awkwardly before retreating toward the bar. Elena stared down at her wine glass afterward. You did not have to say that. Damien leaned back slightly. Yes, he replied softly. I really did. That was the exact moment Elena realized she was already in love with him. Love did not arrive dramatically for Elena Whitmore. It arrived quietly. In coffee refills. In midnight conversations. In the way Damien Holloway always slowed his steps to match hers when they walked through crowded Chicago sidewalks. 3 months after the disastrous restaurant dinner, snow covered the city in thick white silence. Bellamy Jazz House glowed warm against the freezing January night, while jazz music drifted softly through the windows. Inside, Elena balanced 3 dessert plates against one arm, while Clara shouted from the kitchen that someone had burned the pecan tart again. It was not burned. The young line cook yelled back defensively. It was caramelized. It looked like roofing material, Daniel. Elena laughed quietly under her breath as she moved through the tables. Near the piano, Damien sat waiting in his usual booth, scrolling absently through financial reports on a tablet that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He looked up immediately the second she entered his line of sight. Always immediately. You are staring again, Elena said while setting down fresh coffee. Damien did not even try denying it. I am committed to the hobby. It is creepy. It is romantic. Those are dangerously close categories. He smiled faintly into his coffee cup. God, she loved when he smiled without realizing it. The restaurant buzzed softly around them. Glasses clinked. Snow fell outside. Somewhere near the bar, an older couple danced slowly beside the jukebox while Frank Sinatra played low through the speakers. Elena glanced toward them. That is going to be us someday. Damien followed her gaze. Old. Happy. He looked back at her carefully. I could do that. Something warm moved quietly through her chest. Terrifying. Beautiful. Real. But love became complicated the moment the outside world started noticing them together. Articles appeared online first. Mystery woman seen with billionaire investor Damien Holloway. Then came blurry photographs. Questions from reporters. Random strangers pretending not to recognize him while secretly filming him with their phones. Damien handled the tension. Like someone enduring bad weather. Come outside. Exhausted underneath. Elena handled it differently. She disappeared. She stopped sitting beside him at public restaurants. Stopped holding his hand outside buildings. Started leaving Bellamy through the back entrance whenever cameras appeared near the street. One freezing night in February, Damien found her alone by Lake Michigan after work. Wind tore across the water hard enough to sting their faces. Elena stood near the railing wrapped in a wool coat, staring at the black waves below. You vanished again, Damien said softly behind her. She did not turn immediately. I'm standing right here. Not really. Silence. The dangerous kind. Damien stepped beside her slowly. Snowflakes collected against the shoulders of his dark coat. Talk to me. Elena laughed faintly without humor. Do you know what your life feels like from the outside? Complicated. Loud. She finally looked at him. People photograph your groceries, Damien. Only the expensive groceries. She tried not to smile. Failed slightly. He noticed anyway. He always noticed. She exhaled slowly into the freezing air. I do not want to become one of those women people assume is only with you because of your money. Damien stared at her for a long moment. Then he reached carefully into his coat pocket and pulled something small out. A velvet box. Elena blinked immediately. No, Damien ignored her and opened it anyway. Inside rested a simple platinum ring. Elegant. Understated. Beautiful in the quiet way he understood she would love. Elena looked genuinely horrified. Damien. Before you panic, he said calmly. This is not public. There are no cameras. No giant orchestra. No horse-drawn carriages. You considered horse-drawn carriages? I am rich. We consider stupid things professionally. She laughed despite herself, covering her face briefly against the cold wind. Damien stepped closer. Softer now. Serious. Elena. The world around them seemed to disappear for one impossible second. Just snow. Water. City lights trembling against the dark lake. I spent most of my life surrounded by people who loved what I could give them, he said. Quietly. You are the first person who made me feel valuable before knowing what I owned. Elena felt tears threaten unexpectedly. That is not fair. Probably not. His gray eyes stayed locked on hers. Honest. Unprotected. But it is true. The wind howled across the water between them. Somewhere behind the clouds, Chicago traffic moved endlessly through the night. Elena looked down at the ring again. Small thing. Tiny thing. Yet somehow heavy enough to change an entire life. You realize this is insane, she whispered. Damien nodded once. Completely. Another silence. Softer this time. Then Elena smiled through watery eyes and quietly held out her hand. They got married on a Tuesday morning while Chicago was still waking up. No ballroom. No magazine photographers. No orchestra playing beneath crystal chandeliers. Just Elena Whitmore, Damien Holloway, an elderly judge with reading glasses sliding down his nose, and snow falling quietly outside the courthouse windows. You two are strangely calm for people making permanent decisions, the judge muttered while flipping through paperwork. Damien glanced toward Elena. I am internally panicking. He has been saying that for 6 months, Elena replied dryly. The judge snorted softly. Good. Fear keeps marriages honest. Elena wore a cream-colored coat she had bought on clearance 3 winters earlier. Damien wore a charcoal suit worth more than most cars parked outside the courthouse. Somehow, they still looked perfectly matched. When the judge finally announced them husband and wife, Damien stared at Elena for one long quiet second like the moment had knocked all language out of him. Elena smiled nervously. You okay? No, he admitted softly. This is significantly more emotional than I prepared for. She laughed through sudden tears. The judge pretended not to notice. Afterward, Damien insisted on taking her somewhere expensive to celebrate. Elena refused immediately. Absolutely not. Why? Because every billionaire restaurant in this city serves portions the size of decorative candles. Damien looked offended. Tiny food can be luxurious. Tiny food is suspicious. In the end, they celebrated at a 24-hour diner near the river. Red booths. Burnt coffee. Pancakes bigger than the plates. Damien looked strangely happy sitting beneath flickering neon lights while Elena stole fries from his plate. You realize, he said calmly, this is probably the first billionaire wedding dinner in history involving onion rings. Elena pointed her fork at him. And yet you look fulfilled. I am. The simplicity became theirs after that. Secret marriage. Quiet routines. Real life hidden beneath impossible headlines. Damien continued flying between New York, Chicago, and San Francisco building companies worth billions. Elena continued working at Bellamy Jazz House 3 nights a week because she genuinely loved it there. The arrangement confused everyone who accidentally discovered it. You are married to Damien Holloway and still working double shifts? Clara asked one night while aggressively chopping parsley. Elena shrugged. I like normal people. Rude, Clara muttered. Damien secretly loved that Elena refused to become consumed by his world. She still rode the train sometimes. Still bought discounted candles from little shops downtown. Still laughed whenever he accidentally used financial terminology in normal conversations. One evening, he walked into their apartment carrying 6 shopping bags from luxury stores. Elena stared at him from the kitchen counter. What did you do? Damien froze slightly. Nothing. Damien. I may have purchased several unnecessary sweaters. Several. The salesman became emotionally persuasive. She opened one bag and nearly choked. This sweater costs $1,800. Damien looked genuinely confused. It was on sale. Elena covered her face with both hands. You are financially feral. He smiled proudly. You married me willingly. Their apartment itself surprised people most. Damien technically owned penthouses in Manhattan, Miami, and London. Yet somehow his favorite place became Elena's modest 2-bedroom apartment overlooking a quiet Chicago street lined with old brick buildings and tired maple trees. The kitchen faucet squeaked. The elevator broke twice a month. Their upstairs neighbor practiced saxophone terribly every Sunday morning. Damien loved it there. It smells like cinnamon, he said one night while standing barefoot in the kitchen watching Elena cook pasta. That is because I burned the garlic bread again. Still, feels nice. She looked at him carefully then. Billionaire. powerful enough to move markets with one phone call, yet standing there smiling softly at burnt bread like it was luxury. Sometimes love looked exactly like that. Small, honest, quiet enough to miss if you were not paying attention. But secrecy carried weight too. They rarely attended public events together. Damien avoided interviews discussing his private life. Elena kept her ring tucked safely beneath sleeves while working. Not because Damien asked her to hide, because she understood how cruel people became once money entered love stories. One rainy April night, Elena found Damien sitting awake in darkness near the apartment window. Chicago lights reflected faintly across the glass while thunder rolled low outside. "Hey," she whispered. "What happened?" Damien rubbed a hand slowly across his jaw. "Nothing." She walked closer anyway. "That answer is illegal in marriage." A tired smile touched his face briefly before fading. "An article came out today." Elena sat beside him quietly. Damien stared toward the rain. "They called you a gold digger." Her chest tightened immediately. He rarely looked angry anymore. But tonight something colder lived behind his eyes. "Damien," she said softly, "people write nonsense every day." "I know." He exhaled slowly. "But they do not know you." Elena studied him for a moment before gently resting her head against his shoulder. "Good," she whispered. "Some things deserve privacy." Outside, rain continued washing softly over the sleeping city while Damien closed his eyes and leaned his head lightly against hers. And for the first time in a very long time, the billionaire who owned almost everything in the world finally understood what home actually felt like. The dangerous thing about happiness was how quietly it made people forget the world could still interrupt it. By summer, Elena and Damien had built a rhythm that almost felt normal. Mornings with coffee and terrible traffic reports playing softly from the kitchen television. Late-night takeout after Elena's shifts at Bellamy Jazz House. Sunday walks along the river where Damien wore baseball caps low over his face like the richest man in America, trying unsuccessfully to cosplay as anonymous. Sometimes it even worked. Sometimes nobody recognized him at all. Those were his favorite days. "You know what I miss?" Damien asked one Sunday afternoon while they sat on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan. Elena glanced sideways at him. "Privacy. Mozzarella sticks." She blinked slowly. That was unexpectedly emotional. Rich people restaurants stopped serving fried cheese with dignity around 2012. She laughed softly, leaning against his shoulder while sailboats drifted slowly across the glittering water. "You are so deeply strange. And yet legally your problem now." The wedding remained secret outside a very small circle. Clara knew because she accidentally found the marriage certificate sticking halfway out of Elena's tote bag during a lunch rush and nearly fainted beside the espresso machine. Damien's chief of staff knew because legally someone had to prevent billion-dollar assets from accidentally being transferred to Elena's aunt's cat. Beyond that, almost nobody knew, which was exactly how Elena wanted it. Until the reunion invitation arrived. It came in a thick cream envelope with gold lettering and entirely too much confidence. 20-year Lincoln Heights reunion. Rooftop gala. Downtown Chicago. Elena stared at it from the kitchen counter while Damien opened orange juice beside her. "You look concerned," he observed. "I think my high school reunion is trying to intimidate me." Damien glanced at the invitation. Gold lettering. Aggressive gold lettering. Very threatening. Elena sighed dramatically and tossed it onto the counter. "I am not going." Damien poured coffee calmly. "Why not?" She gave him a look. "Because nothing good happens when adults reunite with people who once ranked them in cafeteria attractiveness categories. That feels oddly specific. Trevor Kane once dumped me because a cheerleader owned a convertible." Damien paused mid-sip. "You dated a man emotionally defeated by transportation?" Elena pointed toward him. "See? This is exactly why I avoid reunions." But 2 days later, Clara cornered her beside the restaurant freezer, holding the invitation in one hand and a tray of cheesecake in the other. "You are absolutely going." "No, yes." "Clara." "Elena. I hate reconnecting with fake people." Clara narrowed her eyes. "Baby, you are secretly married to a billionaire and still working evening shifts because you like jazz music and grilled salmon. You already won life." Elena groaned quietly into a stack of linen napkins. Unfortunately, Clara had a point. The reunion itself arrived on a chilly October evening almost 1 year after their wedding. Downtown Chicago glittered beneath the rooftop lights, while old classmates wandered between cocktail tables pretending they had all aged gracefully. Elena almost turned around twice before entering the building. She wore a dark green dress simple enough not to attract attention and left her wedding ring tucked safely beneath her sleeve. Old habit. Old protection. Damien had offered to come upstairs with her. Elena refused immediately. Absolutely not. Why? Because you entering my high school reunion is like releasing a tiger into a petting zoo. Damien looked mildly offended. I am elegant. You own a helicopter. An elegant helicopter. He eventually agreed to stay downstairs in the private lounge while she survived the reunion alone for 1 hour. Text me if anyone becomes emotionally exhausting, he told her before she stepped out of the elevator. That sentence feels very billionaire. I contain multitudes. And now here she was, standing beneath rooftop lights while Trevor Kane laughed too loudly beside the bar, wearing confidence like cheap cologne. The years had been strangely kind to him physically and absolutely devastating emotionally. Elena noticed that immediately. Some people became wiser with age. Trevor had simply become more expensive. Elena Whitmore, he announced dramatically the moment he spotted her across the rooftop. Wow, you actually came. Conversations shifted subtly toward them. Old classmates glanced over their cocktails with carefully disguised curiosity. Trevor walked closer with the same arrogant smile she remembered from 17 years old. Still living in Chicago, he asked. Mostly. Doing what now? Elena answered honestly. I work at a restaurant downtown. Trevor burst into loud laughter while several people nearby exchanged awkward glances. No way, he grinned. Still waitressing? Elena smiled politely. Calm. Controlled. But somewhere far below the rooftop, 3 black SUVs had just quietly pulled up beside the building entrance while Damien Holloway stepped out into the cold Chicago night, wearing a charcoal overcoat and the expression of a man about to accidentally ruin someone's evening without even trying. There was a specific kind of silence that only happened when powerful people entered a room unexpectedly. Heavy silence. Watching silence. The kind that moved through crowds before anyone even understood why. Elena felt it before she saw him. One moment Trevor Kane was still laughing beside the rooftop bar with bourbon in one hand and arrogance in the other. The next, conversations near the elevator slowly began fading out one by one. Glasses lowered. Heads turned. Someone near the piano whispered, "No way." Elena closed her eyes briefly. Damien. The elevator doors slid open softly beneath the rooftop lights, and Damien Holloway stepped out wearing a charcoal overcoat over a perfectly tailored black suit that somehow looked expensive without trying to. He moved calmly through the crowd with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent years walking into rooms where billion-dollar decisions happened before breakfast. No dramatic entrance. No bodyguards swarming behind him. Somehow that made it worse. Trevor noticed the shift immediately and turned toward the elevator with mild annoyance, clearly expecting another attention-seeking finance bro. Then his expression changed completely. Holy, one of the former classmates muttered under his breath. Damien walked past tables glowing with candlelight while the skyline shimmered behind him. People subtly straightened their posture as he passed. Even the bartender froze. Mid-pour. Trevor blinked twice like his brain needed time to catch up. That is Damien Holloway, someone whispered urgently beside him. Trevor immediately adjusted his blazer and posture at the exact same time. Elena nearly laughed out loud. Damien's eyes scanned the rooftop once. Calm. Focused. Then landed directly on Elena. Everything else disappeared from his expression instantly. Softer now. Warmer. Human again. He walked straight toward her while the entire rooftop watched in complete silence. Trevor forced out an awkward laugh and stepped forward with sudden enthusiasm. Mr. Holloway, he said loudly. Huge fan, man. Huge fan. Damien did not even look at him. He stopped directly in front of Elena instead, close enough that she could smell cedarwood and cold autumn air on his coat. You disappeared, he said quietly. Elena folded her arms. I told you not to come upstairs. You also once told me pineapple belonged on pizza. You have a history of poor judgment. A tiny laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Several people nearby looked confused by how naturally they spoke to each other. Trevor attempted another smile. This is crazy, he laughed nervously. You two know each other? Damien finally glanced toward him. Calm gray eyes. emotionless in the terrifying billionaire way. Yes, he answered simply. Trevor immediately extended his hand too aggressively. Trevor Kane. Elena, and I go way back. Damien looked at the hand for a long 3 seconds without moving. The silence became physically painful. Then Damien looked back at Elena instead. You forgot our anniversary dinner, Mrs. Holloway. Silence. Real silence this time. Not awkward. Nuclear. Somewhere near the rooftop edge, a woman nearly dropped her champagne glass. Trevor's smile collapsed slowly like a building realizing gravity existed. Mrs. What? Elena pressed her lips together, trying not to laugh at his face. Damien reached up calmly and brushed a strand of windblown hair behind her ear with familiar ease. I had reservations waiting downstairs, he said softly to her. There was tiramisu involved. I am emotionally devastated. Elena shook her head faintly. You are being dramatic because there are witnesses. Correct. Trevor stared between them like his soul had temporarily disconnected from his body. Wait, he said suddenly. No. Hold on. This is some kind of joke. Damien looked mildly confused. Marriage? No, this. Trevor gestured wildly between them. You and her. Elena finally looked at him fully. Calm. Still calm. You seem very stressed, Trevor. A couple classmates snorted into their drinks trying not to laugh. Trevor ignored them completely. Damien Holloway is married to a waitress? The second the words left his mouth, several people visibly cringed. Damien's expression cooled instantly by several degrees. Not angry. Worse. Disappointed. Interesting sentence, he said quietly. Trevor blinked nervously. I just meant. You meant exactly what you said. The rooftop fell silent again. Damien turned slightly toward Elena. You were right. About what? Your reunion is exhausting. She laughed softly despite everything. Trevor suddenly pulled out his phone in panic mode and typed something quickly. 3 seconds later his face drained completely of color. Forbes article. Damien Holloway finalizes $4 billion acquisition this morning. Same suit. Same face. Same man standing directly in front of Elena, now looking at her like she was the only person on the rooftop worth noticing. Trevor swallowed hard. You are actually married. Damien slid one hand calmly into his coat pocket. That is generally how wedding licenses work. This time several people openly laughed. Even the bartender turned away, pretending to clean glasses while smiling. The rooftop never fully recovered after that sentence. People tried pretending the moment had not happened. They sipped cocktails too carefully. Smoothed jackets. Avoided eye contact with Trevor Kane, who now stood near the bar looking like a man whose entire personality had just been audited publicly. Elena almost felt bad for him. Almost. Damien remained beside her with one hand resting lightly against the small of her back, calm as ever while Chicago lights shimmered across the rooftop glass. The wind had grown colder. Somewhere below, traffic drifted through. Downtown like rivers of gold beneath the dark sky. Trevor finally cleared his throat awkwardly. Okay, he said with a forced laugh that fooled absolutely nobody. This is honestly insane. Nobody answered. Even his influencer girlfriend had quietly disappeared toward the opposite side of the rooftop 20 minutes earlier after realizing richer people were present. Trevor rubbed both hands together nervously. Wow. Damien looked mildly sympathetic now, which somehow made Trevor even more uncomfortable. You really married her, he muttered again quietly, like his brain still rejected the information. Elena tilted her head slightly. You keep repeating that like I am a suspicious tax decision. A few people laughed softly into their drinks. Trevor looked at her carefully then, really carefully for the first time all night. And suddenly something shifted in his expression. Confusion. Regret maybe. Because Elena had not changed the way he expected unsuccessful people to change. She was still calm. Still elegant in that quiet, effortless way she always had been. Except now there was peace in her too. The kind people could not fake. I do not get it, Trevor admitted finally. Damien glanced toward him. Get what? Trevor hesitated. Why her? The question landed badly immediately. Several classmates visibly winced again. But Damien did not react with anger. Instead, he looked toward Elena beside him. Really looked at her. The way he always did. Like the world became quieter when she entered it. Because, he said softly, when everyone else saw money, she saw exhaustion. The rooftop grew still again. Damien loosened one cuff slowly before continuing. The first night we met, I had not slept properly in almost 4 days. Elena looked up at him, surprised he was speaking this openly. Damien rarely discussed those years publicly. Most people around me only cared whether I was useful, he continued calmly. Profitable, connected, important. He glanced toward the skyline briefly. Elena was the first person in a very long time who treated me like I was still human when I could not even remember how to feel like one. Silence. Deep silence now. Trevor stared at him speechless. Damien smiled faintly to himself. She used to bring me coffee without asking questions. Elena groaned softly. Please do not romanticize my customer service. Too late. A small laugh moved through the crowd again. Softer this time. Friendlier. Damien continued anyway. I once sat in her restaurant for 3 hours after a financial scandal hit my company. He shrugged lightly. Everyone in my life was panicking. Investors, executives, reporters. Then he looked directly at Elena again. She sat beside me after closing and asked if I had eaten dinner. Elena's eyes softened immediately, remembering that night. Damien had looked completely hollow back then, exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. That sounds very basic, Trevor muttered awkwardly. Damien nodded once. Exactly. He slid one hand into his coat pocket calmly. Do you know how rare basic kindness becomes once people attach numbers to your existence? Nobody answered him, because suddenly everyone understood something uncomfortable. Trevor had spent the evening trying to impress the rooftop with money. Damien Holloway already had more money than anyone there could imagine. And somehow the thing he loved most about Elena Whitmore was that she treated him normally. Human. Equal. Elena looked away briefly toward the city lights, blinking hard once. Damien noticed immediately. He leaned closer slightly. You okay? You are making me emotional in front of people, she whispered accusingly. That feels rude. He smiled softly. You survived high school with Trevor Kane. I believe in you. Trevor actually laughed at that despite himself. Quiet. Defeated. Honest. For the first time all evening, he sounded less arrogant and more tired. You know, he admitted slowly, staring down into his bourbon glass. I think I spent years trying to become impressive enough that people would regret underestimating me. Elena looked at him carefully. Trevor gave a small, humorless smile. Turns out the people who actually win do not seem interested in proving anything. Damien glanced toward Elena beside him. That is because peace is expensive, he said quietly. And ego usually costs too much. The wind swept across the rooftop again, carrying the distant sound of sirens somewhere far below the city, while everyone stood there silently absorbing the strange, unexpected truth of the evening. Not that Elena Whitmore had secretly married a billionaire, but that the billionaire himself looked at her like she was the luckiest thing that had ever happened to him. By the time Elena and Damien finally left the rooftop, Chicago had begun to rain. Not heavy rain, the soft kind. Quiet rain that turned streetlights blurry and made the city feel gentler than it really was. Behind them, the reunion slowly returned to life. Music started again. Conversations resumed carefully. But something had changed permanently in the atmosphere upstairs. People would talk about tonight for years. Not because a billionaire had appeared unexpectedly, but because Elena Whitmore never once tried to impress anyone while standing beside him. Damien held the elevator door open for her downstairs. Thank you, she said with exaggerated politeness. You are welcome, Mrs. Holloway. The elevator doors closed softly around them, finally shutting out the noise of the rooftop. Silence settled between them. Comfortable silence. Elena leaned back against the mirrored wall and exhaled slowly. Well, she muttered. That was emotionally catastrophic. Damien loosened his tie slightly. For Trevor, maybe. She laughed under her breath. You enjoyed that way too much. Incorrect. He glanced toward her calmly. I enjoyed approximately the correct amount. The elevator reached the private lobby with a soft chime. Outside, rain drifted silver beneath glowing city lights while black SUVs waited quietly at the curb. One driver immediately stepped forward holding an umbrella, but Damien gently waved him back. Then he removed his own coat instead and draped it carefully around Elena's shoulders. She blinked up at him. You are going to freeze. I am wealthy. We are insulated naturally. That is not how money works. Are you sure? She smiled despite herself as they stepped out into the rain together. The city smelled like wet pavement and cold autumn air. Somewhere nearby, jazz music drifted faintly from it. Open restaurant door while headlights reflected gold across the slick streets. For a moment, they simply stood there beneath the glowing skyline. No cameras. No rooftop audience. Just them again. Elena looked sideways at him. You really came upstairs in the middle of a billion-dollar acquisition meeting? Damien slipped his hands into his pockets casually. Technically, the acquisition paperwork was already signed. That is not the point. I had priorities. You arrived with 3 SUVs. 2 of them carried legal documents. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You are impossible. Damien looked down at her then. Serious now. You know I would do it again. The warmth in his voice caught her off guard slightly. Even after all this time, he still sounded surprised by how much he loved her. Like some part of him never expected happiness to stay. Elena reached up quietly and fixed the collar of his rain-dampened shirt. Such a small gesture. Yet Damien immediately softened beneath it. Always. You embarrassed Trevor so badly tonight, she whispered. I barely spoke. Exactly. He smiled faintly. The most expensive thing in the world is silence delivered confidently. Rain continued falling softly around them while traffic moved through downtown Chicago behind the glowing riverfront buildings. Elena suddenly laughed again, remembering Trevor's face upstairs. You should have seen yourself when he tried shaking your hand. Damien looked genuinely thoughtful. I panicked. You panicked? I forgot socially acceptable handshake timing. She stared at him in disbelief for half a second before laughing hard enough that nearby pedestrians turned briefly toward them. Damien watched her carefully while she laughed. Not the polished smile she used for strangers. Real laughter. Bright. Uncontrolled. His favorite thing in the world. There it is, he said softly. Elena looked up. What? The sound that ruined my life. She rolled her eyes affectionately. You were so dramatic after 9 o'clock. And yet you married me anyway. The rain strengthened slightly then, tapping softly against the shoulders of his coat wrapped around her. Damien reached for her hand naturally. No hesitation anymore. No hiding. Elena looked down briefly as their fingers intertwined beneath the Chicago rain. The platinum wedding ring glimmered faintly beneath the streetlights, now visible outside her sleeve for the first time all evening. Damien noticed immediately. So did she. You stopped hiding it, he said quietly. Elena looked up at the city skyline glowing around them. Then back at him. Calm eyes. Certain eyes. I think I am done apologizing for being happy. Something vulnerable moved across Damien's expression before he leaned down and kissed her forehead gently beneath the rain. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just real. The kind of love people spent entire lifetimes searching for without recognizing when it finally arrived. A car horn echoed somewhere in the distance while the city continued moving around them, completely unaware that 2 people had just quietly healed parts of each other the world once convinced them to hide. Damien opened the SUV door for her with exaggerated elegance. Elena paused before getting inside. You know what is funny? She asked. What? She smiled softly. Trevor spent the whole night trying to prove he was successful. Damien looked at her for a long moment before answering. The happiest people usually stop performing. Elena held his gaze for one quiet second beneath the rain before sliding into the car beside the man who once entered her restaurant looking exhausted by the world and somehow ended up becoming home instead. And somewhere above the glowing Chicago skyline, the rain continued falling softly over a city full of people still learning that the quiet ones were never truly ordinary. If this story touched your heart, do not forget to like, share this video, and let us know where you are watching from. And subscribe to When He Chose Her for more emotional stories about love, dignity, and unexpected life-changing moments. Your support helps us continue creating cinematic stories that remind the world that the quiet ones are never truly ordinary. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next unforgettable story.